Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm very excited to announce the start of a brand new Stephen King ranking series. Those of you who are familiar with my channel know that I've already ranked all of Stephen King's novels, and that's a 10-part series where I go and rank all of his novels in terms of my overall enjoyment. This series will be a little different though. I'm going to be doing the same thing except with his novellas. So this is going to be me ranking all of Stephen King's novellas. And I'm very excited for this ranking series in particular because if you're familiar with my channel and you're familiar with my overall Stephen King opinions, you'll know that I absolutely love Stephen King novellas. Overall, in my opinion, Stephen King is a more consistent novella writer than he is a novel writer, a short story writer, or any other form of writing. His novellas are top notch. So really, in many ways, ranking his novellas was a much harder task for me than ranking his novels, because his novels, he has really great ones, he has really bad ones, and then he has a lot that are either kind of mediocre, good, great. It was kind of easy to separate all of them. But with novellas, his novellas in particular, so many of them are top-notch. So many of them are really, really outstanding, and I really enjoy them. There's really only a few that are, well, there's one bad one, which we'll get to, and there's a couple that are kind of mediocre, but most of them I very much enjoy. So ranking them has proven to be very difficult. But I think this will be a lot of fun to talk about, and it'll be a good way to get my opinion out on just his novellas in general, and to give people an insight as to which novellas maybe to read, maybe which novella collections to focus on, and which of his short story collections have the best novellas in them, because even though they are short story collections, he likes to sprinkle in novellas here and there. So for me, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So before I begin this episode, let me quickly summarize sort of the structure of this video series where I rank all of his novellas. I have 33 Stephen King novellas here that I'm going to rank. And where did I get this number, 33? For novellas, it's kind of hard. There's a lot of gray area with deciding whether or not something is a novella. A lot of them are easier because they're in his novella collections. But he's written a lot of novellas that are just in various short story collections. But basically, I took 33, which is a nice number, and these are all of his stories that I would consider to be novella length. And, you could disagree with some of these. Maybe you think some of these are too long to be a novella. Maybe they're more of a short novel. Maybe some of these are too short. Maybe they're just glorified short stories. But basically, this is just what I've decided to call his novellas. It's not really that big a deal, but these are the stories that I would consider to be his novellas. And the basic structure of this series is that the first episode here is going to be the bottom of the barrel. These are his 3 worst novellas, in my opinion. And obviously, I love his novellas, but there are a couple that aren't the best, and like I said, they're just going to be talked about in this episode as the worst or the bottom of the barrel. So if this first episode is going to be about the 3 novellas that I would consider his worst, or at least bottom of the barrel when it comes to Stephen King novellas, I'm also going to have 3 tier levels for his novellas. And each of these tiers will have 10 novellas in them. And so the first tier of 10 novellas is going to be decent novellas. These are all novellas that I would not consider his best, but they are still pretty good They're decent. They're good enough. I like them. I enjoy them. The second tier after that is going to be great. And this is also going to include 10 novellas. And as far as the 30 novellas, these are kind of the middle range where these are really great. They're better than the ones before them that are decent, but they're not quite as good as the top tier. And so the top tier novellas are going to be excellent. And these are going to be my top 10 Stephen King novellas. And so for the structure of this, each of these 3 tiers that have 10 Stephen King novellas is going to get 3 episodes. So in total, this is going to be a 10 episode series, just like my Stephen King ranking series, which, it was kind of a happy accident that ended up being a 10 episode series, because I was just kind of flying off the seat of my pants. Like the first episode, I talked about like 15 Stephen King books, and then the following ones after that, I tried to narrow it down to 10, and then I realized, you know what, I need a little bit more breathing room. So then I started doing 5 books per episode, and it ended up being exactly 10 episodes. This one, I tried to plan it out a little bit more. So the first episode, I'm going to talk about the 3 worst, and then episodes 2, 3, and 4 are going to be the decent ones, and that will be about 10 decent Stephen King novellas. And then episodes, see if I can do math here, 5, 6, and 7 are all going to be about great Stephen King novellas, and that's kind of the middle tier. And then the last 3 episodes, 8, 9, and 10, are all going to be about the top 10 Stephen King novellas, in my opinion. All right, so with all of that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into this episode. Which is bottom of the barrel Stephen King novellas. Now, obviously, I've talked in length here about how I love Stephen King novellas, but by far, the worst Stephen King novella, and I'm sure a lot of people know what this is going to be about if they've watched my channel, is Elevation. I really don't like this. It's in my opinion, one of the worst examples of Stephen King writing. This is easily one of my least favorite Stephen King anything, really, not even novellas. This is just one of the worst stories he's ever told. And the reason for that is that there's not really any conflict in this story. Which, why would I want to read a Stephen King book without conflict and without compelling characters? Like there's no good characters in here. The premise is dumb. It's kind of a rehash of another one of his books, Thinner. It's basically about this guy who's losing weight. He doesn't look like he's losing weight, but he steps on the scale and he's like 20 pounds lighter than he was the day before. But he looks the same. And so he quickly realizes, well, what happens, when I reach 0? Will I just float away? And then King just gets into a bunch of weird stuff with like the town hating on this lesbian couple that opens up a restaurant. And there's a lot of like white savior stuff that happens in here. And literally, like, there's a scene, I don't even care if I spoil this because this is just a piece of shit. There's literally a scene where like the old straight white male character has to help the lesbian character win a race. And it just feels like Stephen King, an old white guy, trying his best to write a very, how do I say this? I don't want to get political here, so I'm just going to avoid all of that. But even not even talking about that, this is just not a compelling story. Like I said, the characters aren't great. And like I said, it's just kind of a rehash of Thinner, but in a much different circumstance. And of course, the ending, it's called Elevation, and it's about a guy, who's losing weight. And this even some of Stephen King's bad stories, I will try to eventually reread them in the future to see if there's anything at all I could gain from a second read through. Maybe I'll like it a little bit better. Maybe I'll appreciate it more. But I honestly do not see myself ever reading this piece of crap ever again. It's one of the worst things he's ever written, and by far his worst novella. So let's go ahead and end that rant and talk about and let's be fair. This is his only novella I would consider bad, just flat out bad. Everything else is at least, these next two. Like I said, this is bottom of the barrel. So these are kind of mediocre, but they're not bad. Oh, I didn't even say what number that was. Number 33, Elevation. Not good. And for number 32, his second worst novella would come from this collection, which is one of his newer short story collections, The Bazaar of Bad Dreams. And it's actually the very first story that we get in here, called Mile 81. Now, don't get me wrong, I think people do generally like this novella to start out the short story collection with. And I wouldn't say that it's bad. I would say it's more mediocre than just flat out bad. For me, though, for it being a novella, I wished it would have been shorter. I wished it would have just been a short story. It's sort of a rehash of, sort of the killer car trope, like Christine, except this car, I think basically like eats, if I'm remembering correctly, it like consumes people, and which isn't, not a bad idea, for Stephen King to tackle. But basically, like, from what I remember, and it's been a while since I've read it, there's like 4 or 5 different people who all come across this car, and you get to see them all eaten. And it's just very repetitive. And it started out pretty good, but then the same things just kept happening. And I'm like, is this going to go anywhere? Like, is this going to do anything different? And pretty much not. It's just that. It's a car eating people or killing people or whatever. And I just remember, there's my cat, who probably won't stop meowing for 5 minutes. But yeah, basically the main reason why I would consider this novella, Mile 81, a mediocre novella, is that it's just repetitive. Like, it's basically doing the same thing over and over again, and it's just not one of my favorites, and I would rank it number 32. And number 31, the last novella that I'll talk about in this first episode of my ranking series, we'll go with The Library Policeman, which is the third novella in 4 Past Midnight. And for anyone who's interested in knowing like which one of his novella collections is my least favorite, it's this one. And let me also preference, since this is the very first episode of this ranking series, I'm basing a lot of these rankings off of these novellas that I haven't read in a long time. So a lot of these are just coming off of memory. I'm not going back and rereading all of these. I'm just saying which are my favorites and least favorites based on my memory of all of these. So I'm not necessarily going to remember every aspect of all these novellas, but for some of them, I am fairly confident that they're either my favorites or my least favorites. And The Library Policeman in this one, I always remembered being one of my least favorites. It's got a silly premise. I mean, the library policeman. I mean, you can basically tell what kind of story that's going to be about. It's from what I remember, it's about a guy who like goes to his old library, and there's, you know, it's a supernatural story about, you know, library policeman. If you, I don't know, if you don't turn your book in on time, like the library policeman's gonna get you, or if you break any rules in the library. I thought it was stupid. I thought it was drawn out. And usually King is very good at crafting novellas and having them be the perfect length. But for this one, it probably would have made a better short story. But yeah, the way it's written as is, like, I'm pretty sure it's over 100 pages, which is just way too long for such a silly concept. It is, it's almost 200 pages. No wonder I didn't like it. That's like a short novel. Yeah, that's no good. So yeah, silly concept, not very compelling characters, but again, not terrible. It's just mediocre. Like, it could have been a really good, maybe even a shorter novella. Maybe not even a short story, just a shorter, just condense it down a little bit. Jeez. But yeah, I always remembered that one being very mediocre and just not one of my favorites. So for number 31, we're going to go with The Library Policeman. All right, so that is the end of my very first episode in my new series where I rank all of Stephen King's novellas. And just to recap, number 33, Elevation, terrible. Number 32, Mile 81, which isn't bad. It's mediocre, very repetitive. And number 31, The Library Policeman, slightly too long, very silly concept, just not one of my favorites. So next week for episode 2, I'm going to be looking at the Stephen King novellas that I would rank 30, 29, and 28, and 27. Yeah, I'll talk about 4 of his novellas. And like I said, these are all going to be decent novellas where they are pretty good. They're just not as good as compared to some of the ones that I would consider great or excellent. All right, so please let me know what you guys think of this concept of ranking all of his novellas. Please let me know what you thought of my picks for the bottom of the barrel novellas. Please let me know what your favorite Stephen King novellas are, what your least favorite Stephen King novellas are, and maybe try to predict what novellas you think I'm going to put in my top 10. I think that'll be a lot of fun seeing who comes up with, who's closest to predicting what my top 10 is. I think that would be a lot of fun. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.